The words struck me like a physical blow, right in the middle of my father's eulogy. Eleanor's breath was a warm, cloying presence against my ear, but her whisper was colder than a winter grave. "You were adopted," she breathed, the words slithering into my mind. "He never really loved you anyway." I stood there, frozen solid in the front pew of Grace Chapel, my hands clutching the funeral program so hard my knuckles were stark white against my black dress. All around us, the hushed grief of the mourners shifted into a tense, uncomfortable murmur as Eleanor's voice suddenly climbed, no longer a secret but a declaration for all to hear. "Everything goes to my son. That's what Daniel wanted." The gasps that rippled through the congregation felt distant, muted, as if I was submerged deep underwater. This moment, this precise, devastatingly cruel moment, was something I had unknowingly been bracing for. For 4 long months, I'd felt a darkness gathering, a calculated malice hiding behind Eleanor's saccharine smiles and the strange, new arrogance my stepbrother Leo wore like a stolen suit. Before we go any further, I want to say thank you for being here with me, sharing these moments that expose the true strength of family and the ultimate power of truth. If you're someone who believes that love and integrity should always win out over greed and deception, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider subscribing. It costs nothing and it helps our community grow, reaching more people who need to see stories of resilience like this one. Now, let's get back to how it all came crashing down. But let me take you back. Let me show you how we ended up here, in this chapel where my father's body was resting in a casket he would have absolutely despised. Too ornate, too ostentatious, a final choice made by a woman who had only been in his life for 7 years. Dad died on a Tuesday, a sudden, massive heart attack on a construction site where he was building a custom home for a local family. At 58, Daniel Carter was supposed to have another 20 or 30 years in him. He was supposed to be the one to walk me down the aisle one day, to meet his grandchildren, to finally retire to that small cabin in the mountains he was always sketching on napkins. Instead, his foreman found him collapsed beside a pile of 2x4s, his worn leather tool belt still cinched around his waist. The call didn't come from the hospital. It came from Eleanor. I was sitting in my small cubicle at Apex Solutions, trying to focus on a new campaign proposal, when my phone vibrated, her name flashing on the screen. There was something in her voice from the very first word that set my nerves on edge. It wasn't raw grief, not the shattered sorrow you'd expect. It was something else. Something controlled, almost rehearsed. "Ava, you need to sit down," she said, her voice unnaturally steady. I could hear Leo in the background, his voice a low hum of questions. "It's your father, Daniel. He had a heart attack this morning. He's gone." Gone. Such a small, simple word for an event that felt like the world splitting in two. I remember my coffee mug slipping from my numb fingers, the dark liquid seeping across my desk, staining papers I couldn't even see anymore. Eleanor just kept talking, her words a stream of logistics about arrangements and decisions and practicalities. But the thing that struck me, the thing that burrowed into my brain even through the fog of shock, was how quickly she had moved on from the man to the mess. "I know this is a terrible shock, Ava, but we have to be practical," she'd said. "Daniel left very specific instructions about how he wanted everything handled. That should have been the first giant blaring red flag. My dad was the least practical man I knew when it came to planning. He was a man of impulse and instinct, a master of improvisation who believed that most problems could be solved with a bit of grit and the right tool. He figured things out as he went. He didn't leave detailed instructions for life, and certainly not for death. But grief is a strange and powerful sedative, isn't it? It makes you second-guess your own certainties, blurring the edges of memory until you start to believe you're the one who's wrong. The next few days were a miserable blur of funeral homes and cloying floral arrangements. Eleanor took command with an efficiency that felt less like loving care and more like a corporate takeover. She was a whirlwind of activity, scheduling meetings with the funeral director, selecting the casket, picking out the music, all while I drifted through my childhood home, feeling like a ghost. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. I felt like a guest who had long overstayed their welcome. "You don't need to worry your pretty little head about any of this," she'd say, patting my hand with a condescending sweetness that made my skin crawl. I know exactly how Daniel would have wanted things. But did she? When she pointed to the polished mahogany casket with ornate gold handles, a monstrosity that cost a small fortune, all I could think of was Dad, covered in sawdust, saying he wanted to be buried in a simple pine box. "Put the money towards something that matters," he'd always say. When I tried to suggest it, Eleanor just smiled sadly. "Oh, sweetie, you're just not thinking clearly. This is about honoring his legacy." When she selected a program of somber classical music for the service, I could practically hear the echo of him blasting Led Zeppelin from his garage workshop, the place he was happiest. Every single choice she made felt like a betrayal, a deliberate erasure of the man he actually was. But every time I tried to offer a different opinion, to speak up for the father I knew, Eleanor would give me that pitying look and remind me of how emotional I was being. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She made my love for him seem like a weakness, my grief a hysterical overreaction. The discussions around his estate were where things went from unsettling to downright bizarre. Eleanor insisted that Dad had left everything perfectly organized in a sealed manila envelope, locked away in their bedroom safe. But she wouldn't let me see it. She wouldn't let me talk to his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. She wouldn't even tell me which bank held his accounts. Daniel wanted to keep things simple for everyone. She would repeat like a mantra anytime I pressed for details. "Everything will be clear soon enough. You'll understand. Simple." There was that word again. But nothing about Eleanor's iron-fisted control and obsessive secrecy felt simple. It felt calculated. I started noticing other things too, small disturbing details that a person in the throes of true grief might overlook. I saw how she'd already begun packing up Dad's most personal belongings, starting with the framed photos of me that had always sat on his dresser, my gap-toothed elementary school picture, the one of us at my college graduation. They were gone, replaced by a generic landscape painting. I heard her on the phone with a contractor talking about renovations, about finally updating this old place, as if my father's body wasn't even cold yet. And then there was Leo. At 21, he was acting less like a grieving stepson and more like a lottery winner. He and his mother had moved in 7 years ago when she married my dad, but Leo had always kept his distance. Dad had genuinely tried to forge a connection with him. He tried to teach him woodworking, invited him out on job sites, attempted to treat him like the son he'd never had. But Leo was always more interested in his video games and his layabout friends than in building any kind of relationship with Daniel Carter. Now, suddenly, it was Dad this and Dad that to anyone who would listen. I walked in on him one afternoon on his phone, audibly discussing property values in the neighborhood while snapping pictures of the living room. When I confronted him, he just gave me a smarmy little shrug. "Just getting familiar with Dad's assets," he said. Assets. As if my father, the man who'd built this house with his own 2 hands, was nothing more than a collection of items to be appraised and liquidated. The moment that truly chilled me to the bone came 3 days before the funeral. I'd gone to the house to retrieve the navy blue suit Dad had worn to my graduation, the one I knew he'd want to be buried in. I found Leo in Dad's workshop. He wasn't building anything or even looking at the tools. He was just sitting in Dad's worn leather chair, swiveling back and forth, a smug look on his face. "This would make a great man cave," he announced when he saw me standing in the doorway. Dad always said he wanted me to make this space my own. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it took my breath away. Dad had never said that. His workshop was his sanctuary. It was the one place in the house that was entirely his, a sacred space filled with the smell of sawdust and potential, with half-finished projects and tools organized with the loving precision of a true craftsman. The thought of Leo turning it into some gaudy game room would have shattered my father's heart. But I didn't say a word. I couldn't find my voice. I just grabbed the suit and fled, the feeling of being an intruder in my own home more suffocating than ever. The worst part of it all was the profound isolation. At 32, my life was a work in progress. My marketing career was solid but uninspired, my romantic life a string of near misses. Dad had always been my constant, my anchor. Losing him felt like my compass had shattered, and Eleanor's behavior was spinning me in 1,000 different directions. I started to question everything, even my own sanity. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe grief was twisting my perceptions, making me see conspiracies where there was only another family's awkward way of handling death. But then my mind kept circling back to the phone calls. In the weeks leading up to his heart attack, I'd tried calling Dad's cell several times just to check in, to hear his voice. But it was always Eleanor who answered. "He's resting, Ava," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. "The doctor says his heart can't handle any stress right now." And yet, whenever I called, I could hear Leo in the background, his voice clear and untroubled. When I'd ask if I could just pop by for a visit, Eleanor always had a ready-made excuse. He was sleeping. He was having a bad day. The doctor had forbidden visitors. But somehow, Leo never counted as a visitor. He was always there, a constant presence, while I was kept at arm's length. Now, sitting in this cold chapel, with Eleanor's poison still echoing in my ears, it all clicked into a horrifying, crystal-clear picture. The isolation, the secrecy, the way she had methodically positioned herself as the gatekeeper to my own father. It had all been a slow, deliberate march toward this exact moment, this public execution. This was her endgame. To humiliate me with a lie about my birth, to steal my father's legacy for her own son, and to erase 32 years of love and history with a few venomous words. But Eleanor had made one fatal miscalculation. She had grossly underestimated how well I knew my father, and she had completely failed to appreciate how much I had learned from him about planning ahead, about being prepared, and about protecting what is rightfully yours. The envelope in my purse felt heavy with destiny as I reached for it, my decision already made. The show was just beginning. The silence that fell after Eleanor's pronouncement was absolute and suffocating. For a single, stretched-out heartbeat, the entire chapel seemed to be holding its breath, every person frozen as they processed the sheer cruelty of what they had just witnessed. Then, the whispers started. A soft rustle at first, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, before it swelled into a low, anxious murmur that filled the hallowed space with a palpable tension. I could feel every single eye in that room boring into me, all of them waiting for me to break, to scream, to cry. Some faces registered pure, unadulterated shock, their mouths hanging slightly open as they struggled to reconcile Eleanor's monstrous words with decades of watching me grow up as Daniel Carter's daughter in this very community. Mrs. Gable, our neighbor for over 30 years, clapped a gloved hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief behind her thick glasses. She'd brought a casserole over the day Dad brought me home from the hospital. Behind me, I could just make out the gruff voice of Frank Peterson, Dad's oldest business partner, whispering urgently to his wife. That can't be right. I remember Danny showing me baby pictures when Ava was just a few weeks old. He was so damn proud of that little girl. But it wasn't shock that kept me rooted to the pew. It was the monumental effort of self-control it took not to let Eleanor see the wound she had inflicted. Every muscle in my body was clenched, my breathing slow and deliberate. I could feel my own pulse thrumming in my throat, a frantic drumbeat against my forced composure. My face, I knew, was a blank mask. Eleanor's transformation was startling in its speed and totality. The facade of the grieving widow she had so carefully maintained for days simply dissolved. Her crocodile tears, which I now saw were nothing more than a performance, had vanished. When our eyes met across the short distance separating us, I saw something that sent a sliver of ice down my spine. Pure, unadulterated triumph. She was gloating. "You should have never presumed to help plan this service," she hissed, her voice just loud enough for the first few pews to hear clearly. The syrupy sweetness she usually coated her words in was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp malice. "You're not even his blood. You have no right to be here, making decisions about Daniel's final farewell." The audible gasps from the mourners nearby only made her smile. It was a small, tight, almost imperceptible upturn of her lips, but it was there. She was relishing this, feeding off the drama she had created. Behind her, Leo shifted his weight, looking deeply uncomfortable with his mother's explosive turn, but clearly not courageous enough to say a word. I watched him fiddle with his tie, Dad's favorite silk tie, I realized with a fresh pang of grief as he tried to read the room's reaction to his mother's spectacle. Maria Garcia, my godmother and Dad's lifelong best friend, reached out and grabbed my arm, her own face streaked with tears. She had known me since the day I was born, had been a constant presence at every birthday, every school play, every significant moment of my life. Her touch was a warm, protective anchor in the swirling chaos, but I gently pulled my arm away. "Let her speak," I said, my voice quiet but carrying with an unnatural clarity in the tense chapel. "It's her moment, too." That simple sentence seemed to change the energy in the room. I saw several people sit up straighter in their pews, their attention sharpening. My unnatural calm in the face of Eleanor's vicious attack was clearly not what anyone had expected, and I saw flickers of confusion and curiosity on faces throughout the congregation. In the fourth row, old Big Mike O'Connell, one of the first guys Dad ever hired for his construction crew, was frowning deeply. I met his gaze for a second and saw something that sparked a tiny bit of hope inside me. Doubt. Not doubt in me, but in Eleanor. His big, calloused hands were clenched into fists on his knees, and I could practically see his mind replaying every interaction he'd ever had with her over the years, reevaluating everything through this new, ugly lens. "This is exactly what Daniel would have wanted," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining confidence as she soaked up the attention. "For his real family, his blood family, to be the ones to honor his memory properly." That was Leo's cue. He stepped forward, and I had to grudgingly admire the thoroughness of his mother's coaching. At 21, he was trying to project an aura of solemn authority that looked completely alien on his boyish features, but his delivery was surprisingly polished. "Dad wanted us to have the house," he said, his voice ringing with more confidence than I'd ever heard him muster before. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. He told us privately that family always comes first, blood family. The way he glanced at me when he said blood family was designed to look sympathetic, a performance of regret, but I saw the cold calculation behind his eyes. This wasn't a son speaking from grief, it was a pawn reciting his lines. Eleanor had prepared him for this, rehearsed it with him. I was sure of it. Several more people in the crowd were nodding along now, captivated by Leo's earnest performance. He looked the part, after all, the grieving stepson, standing tall in a borrowed suit, speaking of family values at his father's funeral. To an outsider who didn't know the real story, it probably sounded perfectly reasonable, but I saw the little cracks in his armor. His hands were trembling just slightly, and he kept darting quick, almost imperceptible glances at his mother, seeking her approval after each line. This was clearly the biggest role he'd ever been given in one of her schemes. "It's what Dad wanted," he repeated, as if saying it again would make it true. He made that crystal clear to both of us. The room was splitting in two right before my eyes. Some people, mostly the ones who had been part of our lives for years, were looking more and more disturbed by Eleanor and Leo's double act. Others, particularly Eleanor's own friends and newer acquaintances, seemed to be buying the narrative they were so desperately selling. I could feel the weight of their collective gaze, the silent pressure to defend myself, to argue, to break down in tears and prove Eleanor right about my supposed emotional instability. But instead, I reached into my purse. My movements were slow, deliberate, and calm. The envelope had been in there for months, a heavy, constant reminder. I'd carried it with me everywhere, to work, to the grocery store, on walks through the park. A part of me had desperately hoped I would never have to use it, that my growing paranoia was just a symptom of my grief. Just then, Mr. Sterling, Dad's lawyer, entered through a side door, clearly having rushed over from his office after getting a call about the commotion. His silver hair was a bit messy, and he was adjusting his glasses as he took in the bizarre scene. He had been Dad's lawyer for 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to his divorce from my mother. The envelope felt both impossibly light and incredibly heavy as I held it out toward him. The whispers died instantly. Every eye in the chapel was now fixed on me. "Play it," I said simply. My voice was steady, clear and resonant in the sudden, absolute silence. Mr. Sterling took the envelope with his usual professional calm, but I saw the slight widening of his eyes as he recognized what was inside. Behind me, I heard Eleanor's sharp, ragged intake of breath, the first truly genuine sound she'd made all day. The chapel fell completely silent again, the air thick with anticipation. Even Leo stopped his nervous fidgeting, his youthful arrogance finally faltering as he realized this was a scene for which his mother's script had no lines. The moment stretched on, pregnant with retribution, as Mr. Sterling carefully opened the envelope and slid out its contents. Mr. Sterling's fingers hovered over the small flash drive for a moment as he examined it. A flicker of recognition crossed his weary face. He had handled these before: emergency recordings, final wishes hastily documented by clients who felt their time was running out. The way he held it, the subtle affirmative nod he gave me, told me he understood exactly what this was. "What is this nonsense?" Eleanor's voice was sharp, but the confident cruelty was gone, replaced by a thin, brittle thread of fear. "You can't just interrupt a funeral with some amateur recording." She started moving toward us, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the stone floor. Mourners turned to watch her, and I saw her mask slip again, the polished composure cracking to reveal the desperation churning underneath. With practiced efficiency, Mr. Sterling connected the flash drive to the chapel's sound system. His movements calm and deliberate, despite Eleanor's rising protests. The tiny device seemed insignificant plugged into the port, but I knew the truth it held. Months of my own quiet planning, of waiting for this very moment, had culminated in this one small piece of technology. "Ava, what do you think you're doing?" Eleanor demanded, her voice climbing into a higher, strained register. "This is completely inappropriate. Daniel wouldn't want—" She never got to finish her sentence, because then my father's voice filled the chapel. It was so clear, so real, it was as if he were standing right there with us. The entire room went utterly still. It was his voice, unmistakably, but it carried a strength and a weight I hadn't heard in the last few difficult months of his life. This wasn't the tired, defeated man Eleanor had described. This was the father I knew, resolute, protective, and finally free to speak his own truth. To my daughter, Ava. Those 4 words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I felt my carefully constructed composure finally begin to fracture, and tears burned hot behind my eyes for the first time that day, but I blinked them back, refusing to cry. I had to be strong for what came next. The time is 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 15th. Dad's voice continued, each word carefully enunciated, just 1 week before the heart attack. While Eleanor was telling me he was too weak for visitors, too fragile for my calls, he had found the strength to do this. I'm so sorry I let Eleanor get between us these past few months, Ava. His voice cracked slightly. I should have been stronger. I should have seen her manipulation for what it was, but I was scared of being alone again. That fear made me weak, and it cost us time we can never get back. I heard a sharp gasp from somewhere behind me, followed by a whispered, "Oh my God," that I recognized as Mrs. Peterson from the church auxiliary. She had known Dad for 30 years, had seen how utterly devoted he was to me my entire life. Eleanor was backing away from the speakers now, her face a frantic kaleidoscope of shock, rage, and a dawning terror. Leo was frozen in place, his mouth agape, as he heard the man he'd just called Dad speak so clearly about manipulation and lies. "I love you." Dad's voice boomed through every corner of the chapel, a warm, powerful wave of sound. "I always have. You are my heart, Ava, my legacy, my greatest pride. Nothing Eleanor has told you can ever change that. Nothing anyone could ever say could change that." The words washed over me, and I felt a knot in my chest that had been clenched tight for months finally begin to unwind. This was my father. This was the man who had taught me how to change a tire, who had stayed up all night building a diorama for my 4th grade science project, who had been my loudest cheerleader at every single turn. Blood or not, it never mattered to me. The recording continued, and I saw a few of the older mourners nodding, remembering. But I know the truth now, about everything Eleanor has told you, and everything she has told me. Eleanor made a choked, strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, but it was pure performance. Even now, she was calculating, her mind racing to find a way to spin this. She made you believe I didn't want to see you. Dad's voice grew stronger, firmer. She told you I was disappointed in you, angry about your career path, upset that you weren't married yet. It was all lies, Ava. Every last word was a lie, designed to drive a wedge between us. Leo was now staring at his mother, his face pale, his eyes wide with a horrified comprehension. This was not going according to their plan. "She told me you said I wasn't really your father," Dad's voice declared, and this time the collective gasp from the congregation was a physical shockwave in the room. That you'd found your real family and had no use for an old construction worker anymore. And I believed her, Ava. God help me, I believed her, because I was so afraid of being abandoned again. My godmother, Maria, was openly weeping now, her hands pressed to her mouth as she listened to the systematic demolition of Eleanor's web of deceit. All around the chapel, I could see the dawning realization on face after face as the full scope of her cruelty became clear. "I want to set things right," Dad's voice continued, a new urgency in his tone. "I need you to know that every single day we've been apart has been torture for me. Every holiday, every birthday, all the time I missed because I was too proud and too scared to just pick up the phone. Eleanor convinced me you needed space, that hearing from me would only make things worse for you." He paused, and in the silence I could hear him take a ragged, shaky breath. When his voice returned, it was filled with a steel I hadn't heard in years, the tone he used when he had made up his mind. But I see it all clearly now. I see what she's done, how she has poisoned us against each other for her own gain, and I will not let her win, Ava, not anymore. You are my daughter in every single way that matters, and I love you more than life itself. Eleanor was stumbling backward now, her eyes darting between the unblinking speakers and the faces of the crowd, which were now turned toward her with open suspicion and disgust. But Leo remained rooted to the spot, his entire world visibly crumbling as he listened to the truth. The weight I had carried for months, the doubt, the grief, the agonizing fear that I had truly lost my father's love, it all just lifted. It vanished into the air, carried away by the sound of his voice. Dad's final words faded, leaving the chapel suspended in a silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. The power of his testimony hung in the air like incense, a sacred and undeniable truth. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. No one spoke. The sheer calculated evil of Eleanor's plan was still sinking in, rippling through the pews. That's when I reached into my purse for the second time. The second envelope was thicker, heavier. Its manila paper was slightly softened at the edges from the months I'd been carrying it. My own private insurance policy. My fingers closed around it, and for the first time since this nightmare began, my hand was perfectly steady. The crushing anxiety that had kept me awake night after night, the paranoia that had me questioning my own sanity, it was gone. In its place was a feeling I hadn't known in a long time, absolute, unshakable certainty, the cold, clean satisfaction of preparation meeting its perfect moment. I held the envelope out to Mr. Sterling. This time, he didn't hesitate. His lawyerly composure was a rock in the middle of this emotional storm. He accepted the envelope with the same focused attention as the first, but I saw his eyebrows raise slightly as he registered its weight and thickness. What now? Eleanor's voice was a ragged crack in the silence, all her authority gone. She sounded exactly like what she was, a cornered animal watching her escape routes vanish one by one. What other theatrical nonsense are you going to inflict on us? But even as she spoke, she was inching closer, her eyes locked on that envelope with a look of pure terror. Mr. Sterling opened the envelope with methodical precision. The crisp sound of the papers rustling as he pulled them out seemed deafeningly loud. I watched his eyes scan the official letterheads and embossed seals before he looked up and addressed the room. "These," he announced, his voice imbued with the gravity of someone about to deliver a verdict, "are DNA paternity test results. 2 separate tests, both conducted by Gene Tech Laboratories, a fully accredited facility recognized by the American Association of Blood Banks." A collective intake of breath swept through the chapel. People leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks. In the front row, Maria had her hand pressed to her heart, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and vindication. "Mr. Sterling held up the first document. "The first test compares DNA samples from Ava Carter and the late Daniel Carter." He paused, letting the statement land with its full weight. "The probability of paternity is 99.98%. Ava Carter is, definitively, the biological daughter of Daniel Carter." The gasps this time were immediately followed by a wave of murmurs. "I knew it." And "Of course she is," echoed from the pews where Dad's oldest friends were sitting. Mrs. Gable was nodding emphatically, fresh tears streaming down her face as 32 years of truth were finally, officially validated. But it was the second document that was the real bombshell. "The second test," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice as steady as a rock, "compares DNA samples from Leo Vance and the late Daniel Carter." He paused again, and this silence was longer, heavier, charged with consequence. "The probability of paternity is 0%. Leo Vance is definitively not the biological son of Daniel Carter." The quiet that followed was a different beast altogether. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. It was the sound of 100 people simultaneously processing a revelation that didn't just change the story, it blew it to pieces. Leo made a noise like he'd been physically punched in the gut. It was a small, strangled sound, but in the perfect stillness of the chapel, it was as loud as a scream. His face had gone chalk white. I watched as his knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the back of a pew to keep himself upright, his eyes darting wildly between his mother and the papers in Mr. Sterling's hands. "That's not possible!" Eleanor's shriek was like shattering glass. All pretense of dignity was gone, replaced by raw, primal panic. "Those tests are fake. She faked them. She manipulated everything." She lunged toward Mr. Sterling, her hands clawing, as if she could physically destroy the truth. But Maria was surprisingly fast for a woman in her 70s. She stepped directly into Eleanor's path, her small frame an immovable object. "You sit down and you shut your mouth," Maria said, her voice ringing with the authority of a lifetime spent teaching Sunday school and commanding respect. "You have done quite enough damage for one lifetime." Two other women from the congregation, their faces grim with disgust, moved to flank Maria, forming a human wall between Eleanor and the lawyer. "She manipulated a dying man," Eleanor screamed, but her voice was breaking, shredded by desperation. "She forged these documents. She's been plotting against us." But her protests sounded hollow, even to her. 6 months ago, when my suspicions had first solidified, I had followed every legal protocol to the letter. I'd used a hairbrush from Dad's side of the bathroom for his sample, and my own had been collected at a certified clinic with a documented chain of custody. It was ironclad. Mr. Sterling confirmed it. "These tests were processed by an accredited lab 6 months ago," he announced to the room. "I personally oversaw the chain of custody for legal validity. The results are admissible in any court of law." Leo was staring at his mother now, his face a mask of dawning horror and betrayal I'd never seen before. The smug, entitled boy was gone, replaced by someone utterly broken. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracking. You told me he was my real dad. You said my biological father died. You said Daniel adopted me because he loved me like his own." Eleanor's head snapped toward her son, and for a fleeting instant, a flicker of something, guilt, pity, crossed her face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cold, calculating expression I knew so well. "He did love you," she said, but her voice had no conviction. "Family isn't about blood, it's about—" "Don't," I said. The word shot out of my mouth with more force than I intended. Every head in the chapel turned to me. "Don't you dare talk about what family is." My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, months of suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. "You knew," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "That's why you did this today. You knew your son wasn't his, and you were terrified that I was." The truth hung between us, a stark and devastating challenge. "You spent 7 years building a lie," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "And when Dad started to see through it, when he started asking questions, you knew your time was running out." Before she could spit out another lie, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. "There is one more document," he said, reaching into the well-worn leather briefcase at his feet. The effect on Eleanor was instantaneous. All the remaining color drained from her face. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish out of water. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice ragged. "The will is in the safe, at home. I have the only copy." Mr. Sterling offered a polite, professional smile that was utterly devastating. "Mrs. Vance, your husband made significant changes to his will just 4 days before he passed away. It was done in my office, with 2 independent notarized witnesses present. He was of perfectly sound mind. He couldn't have. I was with him constantly. His heart condition did not affect his mental capacity," Mr. Sterling interrupted smoothly. "In fact, he specifically requested I document his lucid state for this exact reason. He suspected there might be a challenge to his final wishes." He didn't need to say it. Everyone understood. Dad knew what she was. Mr. Sterling raised his voice, cutting through her rising hysteria. "Mrs. Vance, I would advise you to remain silent while I read the legally binding final wishes of the deceased." The room leaned forward as one. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Daniel Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and declare this to be my final will and testament." He paused. "To my beloved daughter, Ava Carter, I leave everything, my entire estate." The list that followed was a breathtaking testament to my father's love and foresight. The family home at 247 Willow Creek Lane, built with my own hands. My company, Carter Construction LLC, including all equipment, contracts, and assets, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, life insurance policies, and retirement funds. He had been far more successful than I ever knew. And, Mr. Sterling continued, all personal property, including my workshop and all its contents, and every photograph, document, and memento of our life together. But it was the next clause that was the final fatal blow. To Eleanor Vance and her son, Leo Vance, I leave nothing. They have actively and systematically worked to destroy my relationship with my daughter through a campaign of deception and manipulation. They are not my family, and they have no claim on what I have built. The chapel exploded. People were on their feet, talking openly, staring at Eleanor with undisguised contempt. Frank Peterson, Dad's business partner, was shaking his head. "I knew something was wrong," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Tom kept asking me if I'd heard from Ava, if she was mad at him. Now I know why," Eleanor finally snapped. "Those papers are fake," she shrieked, lunging toward the lawyer again. But this time, her path was blocked by Big Mike O'Connell. The big construction worker, who had known me since I was a little girl, simply stepped in front of her. Behind him, 3 other men from Dad's crew formed a silent, immovable wall. "Ma'am," Mike said, his voice a low rumble, "I think it's time for you to go. You've dishonored Tom's memory enough for one day." Leo had collapsed into a pew, his head in his hands, completely broken. I almost felt a flicker of pity for him, but then I found my voice one last time. In the center of the chaos, I was an island of calm. "You played your hand too early, Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "I came here today prepared to grieve my father and share his legacy with grace. I was even prepared to make sure you and Leo were taken care of despite everything." I paused, letting that sink in. But after today, after your cruelty, your lies, your attempt to humiliate me at my own father's funeral, you made this choice for all of us. The finality in my voice seemed to be the last straw. She stood there, swaying as the full weight of her loss hit her. It wasn't just the money. It was her reputation, her place in this community. Everything she had schemed for was gone. She stood there for another 10 seconds, her face a mask of disbelief, before the pure, desperate rage took over. "This isn't over," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'll contest this. I'll prove you manipulated him." But as she scanned the room, she found no allies. Every face was turned against her. Pete Garrison and the other men from Dad's crew didn't say a word. They simply positioned themselves on either side of Eleanor and began walking her toward the chapel doors. It was a silent, unceremonious escort. Leo stumbled after them, a ghost of the arrogant young man he'd been just an hour before. As the heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, her final hollow threat, "This isn't over, Ava," was cut off. The silence that followed was one of pure collective relief. And then the healing began. Before I could even take a full breath, I was surrounded. Maria hugged me fiercely, whispering, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have known better." "Mrs." Gable clutched my hands, tears in her eyes. "She told me you'd found your biological parents and said you didn't need Daniel anymore." It sounded so wrong, but she was so convincing. Each apology revealed another layer of Eleanor's venomous web. She'd told Dad's partner I was angry about the business. She'd told his pastor I'd become too worldly for church. But the most chilling part came from Maria. "She showed me text messages, Ava," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Messages she said were from you, saying terrible things about your father. They were forgeries, of course, but at the time..." Within weeks, Eleanor's legal challenges fizzled out. Her daytime TV lawyer dropped the case when he realized the inheritance she'd promised as his fee was now legally mine. I heard through the grapevine that Leo had moved back east to live with an aunt who had little patience for his mother's theatrics. 3 weeks after the funeral, I finally walked back into my childhood home. My home. The air felt lighter, cleansed of Eleanor's toxic presence. I went straight to the workshop. It was just as Dad had left it, a sanctuary of sawdust and oil and love. And there, on his workbench, was one last envelope with my name on it. "My dear Ava," the letter inside began, "I've been trying to find the courage to call you. Karen keeps telling me you need space. I don't know what I did to hurt you so badly, but I need you to know I love you more than life itself. You are my greatest accomplishment. If I have failed you, I am so deeply sorry. All my love, Dad." I sat there, in his chair, in his sanctuary, and I finally let myself cry. Not just for his death, but for the precious time a cruel woman had stolen from us. But as I sat there, surrounded by the life he had built, I could feel his presence. He was the father who had taught me to be strong, to be prepared, and to never let anyone else define my worth. His love had been silenced for a time, but in the end, it was the loudest thing in the room. And finally, I could hear it perfectly. If this story of calculated justice had you on the edge of your seat, go ahead and smash that like button. My favorite part was when Ava calmly handed over that first envelope, turning the tables in an instant. What was your favorite moment? Let me know down in the comments. And for more incredible stories of truth winning against deception, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. The end of the story.